We were 4 days into a family reunion in the mountains when the fog came up the valley and stopped being weather. I say that plainly because everything I got wrong that week, I got wrong by treating it like weather. And I need you to understand from the start that it wasn't. It came up like fog. It moved like fog. And then it did a thing fog does not do, which is that it decided where it was going. And after that, nothing my family knew about the world was worth anything, including the maps, including the road out, including me. There were 19 of us that year. I'll give you the shape of it because the shape matters. My family does a reunion every summer at a place called The Hole, an old lodge and a cluster of cabins my great-uncle bought cheap in the 70s, up a gravel county road in a fold of the mountains where 2 ridges come together and a creek runs between them. No cell service, never has been, and everyone treats that as the point. You drive up, you lose your bars around the second cattle guard, and for a week you're just people again. Cousins and aunts and the little kids and the old folks, cooking too much food and playing cards on the long porch. 19 of us that year, across 4 generations. My grandfather, Pop, who was 86 and sharp as a tack, and the reason any of us still came. My parents, my aunt and 2 uncles. A scatter of cousins my age, most with spouses, some with kids. My own 2 boys, 6 and 9, and me. I want to be honest about who I was that week, because the rest of it doesn't make sense otherwise. I'm not the family loner. I'm not estranged from anybody. My marriage is fine. My job is fine. I install and service commercial refrigeration, walk-in coolers and ice machines and the big compressor racks in grocery stores. And I like it. It's honest work with your hands and your head both. The reason I was the one who ended up carrying this is dumber and more human than any tragedy. I was there because it was my turn to bring the trailer. Somebody in the family has to haul the utility trailer up every year. The one with the extra coolers and the folding tables and the generator and the propane. And that year, it was me, which meant I had the only vehicle that could pull a load back out on a bad road. And it meant I was the one everybody looked at when things went wrong, because the man with the trailer is the man with the truck. And the man with the truck is the man who's supposed to be able to get people out. That's the whole reason. I wasn't chosen for anything. I just had a hitch. The first 3 days were the reunion I'd had a dozen times. I'll skip most of it, but I'll keep one thing, because it becomes the center of everything. Pop had an old marine radio. A big cream-colored VHF set from probably the 60s, chrome dials gone dull, a coiled mic on a hook, and it had no business being in the mountains at all. 300 miles from any ocean. Pop had been a merchant sailor young, before the family, before any of us. Years he almost never talked about. And the radio was from those years. And it lived on a shelf in the lodge's main room, like a trophy nobody remembered winning. It hadn't worked in decades. The cord had been cut, actually cut, not unplugged, snipped clean a few inches from the housing. And Pop said he'd done that himself a long time ago and never said why. And if you asked, he'd change the subject in the particular way he had that told you the subject was closed. My boys loved it. They'd sit and spin the dead dials and pretend to call for help from a sinking ship. And Pop would watch them do it with a look on his face. I didn't have a name for it then, and can't stop seeing now. The anomaly, the real first one, came on the 3rd night. And it came through Pop, not through any instrument, which is why I want you to hear that the horror in this never lived in a machine. We were on the porch after the kids were down. The adults, cards and a bottle going around. And Pop got quiet, quieter than the game accounted for. And he was looking out at the tree line where the creek came down. And the fog was starting, just a low white settling in the bottoms the way it did most nights up there. And Pop said, not to anyone, "It's early this year." And my aunt said, "Early for what?" and he didn't answer, and somebody dealt the next hand. And that was it. It's early this year. A man looking at fog. I've laid awake more nights than I can count on those 4 words. Because he knew. Whatever this was. My grandfather had seen it before, a long time ago, on the water. And he'd cut a cord to keep from ever hearing it again. And he sat on that porch and watched it come up the valley, and all he said was that it was early, because he was 86. And he'd already decided, I think, that there was no point warning people about a thing they wouldn't believe until it was too late to matter. That's the ignored warning. It wasn't a note or a rule. It was an old man going quiet. And all 19 of us missed it. The 4th morning is when the weather stopped. The fog hadn't burned off. That was the first wrong thing, small enough to explain away. And everyone explained it away. Must be an inversion. Must be the creek running high, cool air trapped in the fold. But it wasn't lying low in the bottom anymore. It had come up to the cabins in the night, and it sat there, thick, still. And it didn't move with the wind because there was no wind. And it didn't thin as the sun climbed because you couldn't find the sun. And it was quiet inside it in a way that I noticed with my body before my mind caught up, because I work in rooms full of running compressors, and I know what a space sounds like when something that should be humming has stopped. The birds were gone. Not quiet, gone. 4 days of jays and wrens and the creek and the wind in the pines. And that morning there was the creek and nothing else. And even the creek sounded farther off than it was, muffled, like the fog was a blanket laid over the whole valley. My 9-year-old, Eli, was the one who said the thing that put the first real cold in me. And he said it the way kids say true things, without weight. He'd been out by the tree line at the edge of where we let them go. And he came back and he said, "Dad, the fog doesn't come past the rope." We'd strung a rope years ago between 2 posts to mark how far the little kids could wander toward the creek. And I went and looked, and he was right. And it was the most wrong thing I had ever seen with my own eyes. The fog stood at the rope, not near it, at it. A wall of white as clean and straight as if someone had cut it with a knife, following that rope line across the clearing. And on our side, the air was clear and ordinary, and you could see the grass wet with dew. And on the other side was a white nothing, and the boundary between them did not drift or curl or behave like any fog that has ever existed. Fog doesn't have an edge. This had an edge. It had chosen the rope, our rope, a thing we'd put there, as its line. And I stood looking at that, and I felt the ground of the ordinary world tilt under me. And then I did what I've done my whole life with things I can't fix on the spot, which is I decided to deal with it practically. I told Eli to keep the little ones away from the rope. I went to find the other adults. I made it a logistics problem. Because a logistics problem is a thing a man with a trailer can solve. And the other thing, the thing my body already knew, was not. Here's the coworker acting too normal beat. Except it wasn't a coworker. It was my Uncle Dale, my mom's younger brother. A good man, a talker. The one who ran the reunion schedule and grill rotation with a clipboard like it was a company retreat. I found Dale at the lodge, and I told him about the fog and the rope and the edge. And I expected him to come look, to be alarmed, to be Dale. And he wasn't. He listened with a little smile and he said, "Yeah, we get a heavy fog most years. It'll lift by lunch." And he went right back to writing on his clipboard, planning the afternoon, the horseshoe tournament, who was making dinner. And I said, "Dale, come look at it. It's got a straight edge. Fog doesn't have a straight edge." And he said, still writing, still smiling, "You worry too much. You always did." Which isn't even true. I don't. And then he said a thing that I have turned over and over since. He looked up at me and he said, "Everybody's still here, aren't they? 19. Everybody's accounted for. That's what matters." And he went back to his list. And it wasn't the words. It was that he'd said 19 without counting, without pausing, the way you'd give a number you'd been thinking about. A number that was on his mind before I ever brought him a reason for it to be. And it landed on me wrong, and I didn't know why yet. And I filed it, the way you file a thing that scares you when you don't have room to be scared. I went to Pop instead. Pop was on the porch where he'd been the night before, in the same chair, looking at the same tree line. And the fog stood at the rope past the clearing behind me, and Pop was looking at it. And I sat down next to him, and I didn't know how to start, so I just said, "Pop, what is it?" Not what is the fog, what is it? And he was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. And then he said, "You should get the boys in the truck and go now, while the road's still the road. While the road's still the road." And I asked him what that meant. And he turned and looked at me, and there was no drama in his face. Just a tiredness so deep it scared me worse than fear would have. And he said, "It comes up out of the low places every so often, not every year. It came up around the ship, the November I don't talk about. And we lost 4 men to it before it went back down. And it never touched the water once. It doesn't come for you across the ground. It calls, and it waits for you to come to it. And it's very patient, and it's very good at sounding like the thing you'd walk into the water for." And then he said, "I cut that cord in 1961, and I have not heard the voice since, and I would like to die not hearing it. Take your boys and go." I want to tell you I loaded my kids in the truck that minute. Every part of me that's had 8 months to think about it screams that I should have. But you have to understand what he was asking. He was asking me, on the strength of an old man's ghost story about a fog that calls to you, to grab my 2 sons and abandon my mother, my father, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins and their kids, 17 other people, and drive away down a road nobody else thought was in danger, in the middle of a family reunion, over a bank of morning fog. If I'd done it, if the fog had lifted by lunch like Dale said, I'd have been the man who panicked and ran out on his whole family and left them to laugh about it for the next 20 years. And there was a smaller, uglier thing too. And I'll own it because owning it is the only thing I have left to offer. I didn't want to be the coward. I didn't want to be the one who believed the crazy story. I wanted to be the practical man, the man with the trailer, the man who stays and helps and gets everybody out together if it comes to that, the competent one. And Pop was offering me a role I couldn't stand to play, which was the frightened man who saves only his own and runs. So I told him I'd keep the boys close and we'd all leave together in the morning as a family if the fog was still strange. I made it a plan. I made it reasonable. And Pop looked at me and he nodded, slow, and he said, "You're a good boy. That's the trouble with it. It's always the good ones who wait." And he turned back to the tree line, and I went to go be useful. And I have thought every single day since about the difference between being good and being useful, and how the fog knew which one I was. The personal thread, the human one, ran through my youngest, Sam, who was 6. Sam had been off since the 3rd night. Quiet, clingy, not himself. And my wife would have known what it was in a second, but my wife wasn't there that year. She'd stayed home with a work thing. And I'm not the parent who reads the small signs. I'm the parent who fixes the bike and throws the ball. So I'd chalked Sam's mood up to a bad night's sleep. But that 4th afternoon, with the fog standing at the rope and refusing to lift, Sam climbed into my lap on the porch, which he hadn't done in a year, too big for it. and he put his mouth against my ear, and he whispered, "Daddy, somebody keeps saying my name from the trees, but it's not a nice somebody, and it knows the song Mommy sings." And every hair on my body stood up because my wife has a song, a little made-up bedtime thing, nonsense words, that exists nowhere but in our house, that Sam has never sung to anyone, that no one at that reunion had ever heard. And I asked him, careful, keeping my voice level for his sake, "When did you hear it?" And he said, "Last night, and this morning. It's out past the rope." It sounded like Mommy first, and then it didn't. And I held my little boy and looked out at the white wall standing across the clearing. And I say, I understood that Pop was not telling a ghost story. It calls, and it's very good at sounding like the thing you'd walk into the water for. It had already found the door into my family, and the door was a 6-year-old. And the key was his mother's voice singing a song that had no business existing out there. In the trees, that was the afternoon I stopped explaining things away. And it was already too late to be the first thing, because while I'd been sitting with Pop and holding Sam and making reasonable plans, the 4th morning had become the 4th evening. And somewhere in there, the first person went out to the rope and didn't come back. And nobody noticed for the longest time because Dale had the count wrong. In a way I didn't understand yet. Dale kept saying 19. We're all here, 19. And it was only when my aunt went cabin to cabin at dinner calling everyone to eat that we came up short and we counted. All of us on the porch in the last gray light with the fog standing at the rope. We counted by hand, twice, and there were 18. My cousin Marie, who'd gone to bring in the laundry off the line near the tree edge before dark, was not among us. And her folded laundry sat in its basket at the foot of the porch steps where she'd set it down. And the fog past the rope was quiet and white and patient. And out of it, faint in Marie's own voice, easy and unhurried, somebody who was not. Marie called back to us that she was fine. She'd be right there. Just help me with this. Would somebody come help me with this? And my Uncle Dale stood up from the table with that same little smile and said, "See, she's right there," and started down the steps toward the rope before any of us could move. I got to Dale before he reached the rope. I want that on the record because it's one of maybe 2 things I did right that whole week. And both of them cost me later. I came off the porch and I got a fistful of his shirt and I hauled him back. And he fought me. He actually fought me. An easygoing man with a clipboard swinging his elbows to get free and go toward a voice in the fog. And the whole time, the thing out past the rope kept calling in Marie's voice. Come help me with this. So calm, so ordinary. Would somebody just come help? And Dale kept saying, she's right there. She needs a hand. Let me go. And I got him down on the grass, and I held him there, while my father and one of my cousins came off the porch to help me pin him. And Pop stood up from his chair, the only one of us not surprised, and he said loud, in a voice I'd never heard him use, "Nobody answers it. Nobody goes to the rope. You answer it. It has you." And Dale went slack under me all at once, and blinked, and looked around like a man waking up, and said in his own voice now, small, "Marie's out there. I heard Marie." And Pop said, "That's not Marie anymore. Marie's the reason it knows how to sound like Marie." That's the reveal. And it landed on all 18 of us at once on that dark lawn. And it reorganized everything behind me the way the truth always does. Sickeningly, all in a rush. It didn't take you and leave a body. It took you and kept you, or kept enough of you. The voice, the songs you knew, the names you loved. And then it used what it took to call the next one out. Every person made it better at getting the next. Marie had gone out to the line at dusk, and it had called her in something's voice. And now it had Marie's voice to call Dale. And if Dale had reached the rope, it would have had Dale's. And Dale ran the reunion. Dale knew everybody's name and everybody's kid and everybody's soft spot. And I understood standing there that it wanted Dale specifically, or people like Dale, the ones who hold the group together, the ones whose voice the rest of us would follow anywhere. Because a family doesn't scatter one at a time if you can get the man with the clipboard to call them all to dinner. And I understood Dale's count. 19. He'd been saying 19 all day. Everybody's here. 19 accounted for before we ever came up short. He hadn't miscounted. He'd been hearing it. It had been in his ears since the third night, the way it had been in Sam's, telling him everyone was fine, everyone was accounted for. 19. Keep them calm, keep them here. Don't let anybody get in a truck and go while the road's still the road. The thing hadn't just been calling people out to the rope. It had been working inside too, through the man most likely to keep the group together and still whispering reassurance in the exact register that makes a family stay put. And Dale had been repeating it to us all day, without knowing it wasn't his own thought. It's early this year, Pop had said. And then it had gotten to work, patient, quiet, first learning us, then calling us. And we'd spent the whole day being managed toward staying by a voice wearing my uncle's good nature. We got everyone inside the lodge and we barred the doors, which was almost funny, because Pop kept telling us the doors didn't matter. It doesn't come across the ground. It doesn't need a door. It needs you to want to open one. But barring the doors gave people something to do with their hands and their fear. And I let them do it, because I've learned in 8 months that keeping frightened people busy is sometimes the only mercy available. 18 of us in the main room of the lodge with the lamps lit and the dead marine radio on its shelf, and the fog standing at the rope out every window. Close now, closer than the rope. It had moved up while we were inside, and it stood at the edge of the clearing, maybe 40 feet from the porch, patient, white, and out of it. All night, the voices came. I have to try to describe the voices, and I'll fail, but I have to try. They were perfect. That's the horror of it. They were perfect. They were the real voices of people we loved, and they didn't wail or threaten. They were warm. They were casual. They called us by the names only family uses, the childhood names, and they said the small, ordinary things that a voice you trust says. My mother heard her own mother, dead 11 years, calling her by a nickname no living person knew. One of my cousins heard her daughter, who was standing right next to her, asleep on her feet, heard her daughter's voice out in the fog asking to be let in, and had to look down and confirm her child was in her arms before she could stop herself going to the window. It knew everything. Marie's laundry had told it to Marie. Marie had told Marie's whole address book of loved ones. And now it stood 40 feet away and read us back to ourselves in the voices we could least refuse. And the only defense any of us had was Pop's rule. Nobody answers it. Nobody goes to the rope. And 18 people trying to hold that rule through a night while the dead and the sleeping called them by their soft names is not a thing I will ever be able to make you feel. The system that failed, the practical one, the thing that turned a bad night into the choice I have to live with, was the truck. My truck, the trailer truck, the man with the hitch truck, the only vehicle in the family that could pull a load out on a bad road, and the only reason anybody looked to me for anything. Around 3 a.m, with the voices going and people at the ends of themselves. I made the decision that we couldn't wait for a morning that might not come. That Pop was right that we had to go while the road was still the road. That 18 people would fit if we packed them in the truck bed in the cab, and I made trips, or we all crushed in for one run, down to the county road, and cell service and other human beings. and I went out the back with my father to get the truck, which was parked down by the trailer at the bottom of the clearing, near the tree line, near the rope, closer to the fog than anything we owned. The truck was there, it was fine. And the fog was at it. While we'd been inside, the white wall had come up and taken in the whole bottom of the clearing. And my truck and the trailer sat inside the fog now, 30 feet into it, dim shapes. And to reach them, we'd have to cross the rope, go into the white. The one thing Pop said you never do. And from inside the fog, from the direction of my truck, a voice called to me. My wife's voice. My wife, who was 300 miles away, safe at home. My wife's exact voice coming from inside the fog by my truck. And she sang, soft, easy, the little nonsense bedtime song that exists nowhere but in our house. The song Sam had heard, the song no one out there could possibly know. And she sang it, and then she said in her voice, warm, "The keys are in it, honey. Come get the keys, get the boys, and come get the keys." And I stood at the rope with my father's hand on my arm. And I've never in my life wanted anything the way I wanted to walk into that fog toward my wife's voice. And it took everything I had ever been, every practical bone, my whole life's habit of not being the man who believes the crazy thing, turned inside out and used against me to not go. My father was not as strong as me that night, and I say that with love, and it is the worst thing I know. He heard his own voice out there. That's what he told me. In the 2 seconds we had, he said, "Son, I can hear me. It's talking in my own voice." And I didn't understand, and I still don't fully. Whether it was reading him back his own thoughts, or whether the thing that gets you last is yourself. But my father let go of my arm, and he stepped over the rope, into the fog, toward the truck, before I could close my hand on him. And I grabbed and got nothing but air. And he walked into the white calm and unhurried. And I heard his footsteps on the gravel by the truck. And then I heard my father's voice from inside the fog. Turn around and call back to me, warm, easy. "Come on, it's fine in here. Come get the truck. Bring the boys." And it was already not my father. It had him. Between one step and the next, it had my father. And it was wearing him to call me. And I stood at the rope with my hands empty, and I did not go in after him. And that is the first of the 2 unbearable things. That I heard my own father's voice ask me to come. And I turned around and walked back to the lodge and left him in the fog. Because Pop's rule was the only true thing left in the world. And the rule was, you do not go to the voice. Not for anyone, not ever. And I obeyed it. And obeying it meant leaving my father. The truck was gone then. You understand that. The one system that could have carried 18 people out sat 30 feet inside a fog that ate anyone who crossed the rope, and the keys were in it. My father had been right about that at least. The keys were in it. And it might as well have been on the moon. The man with the trailer, the man with the hitch, the whole reason I was anyone in that family that week. And my truck was bait now. A beautiful piece of bait sitting in the white with my wife's voice singing beside it. And there was no getting to it. And no getting out the road. Because the road ran down through the bottom of the clearing, and the bottom of the clearing was fog. We were 17 by then, and the night was long. And the thing about a night that long is that a rule made of willpower can't hold 17 frightened, exhausted, grieving people through all of it. I won't tell you everyone we lost, because they weren't losses like a battle. They were quiet. They were a person at a window one moment and gone the next. A screen door easing shut, a soft step off the porch toward a voice. And every time it happened, the chorus outside got one voice richer, one voice harder for the rest of us to refuse. My aunt went to her mother. A cousin went to a child that was, God help us, asleep upstairs the whole time. Each one that went made the next one likelier, exactly as Pop had said. It's very patient, and it's very good at sounding like the thing you'd walk into the water for. And by the gray coming of the 5th morning, there were 9 of us left in the lodge, 9 out of 19. And my 2 boys were 2 of the 9, and that was the only arithmetic I could still do. Pop was one of the 9, and near dawn he took me aside to the shelf where the dead radio sat. And he did the thing that I think he'd been deciding to do since the 3rd night, when he said it's early. He picked up the cut cord, the cord he'd snipped in 1961, and he held the 2 clean ends near each other, not touching. And he said, "It came for the ship through this." That's how it is called. It uses a channel. On the water, it was the radio. Up here, it's got no radio, so it's using the low ground, the fog. It's slower that way. It has to come up out of the valley and learn you one at a time. But if I give it the channel back, and he looked at the cut cord, if I plug it into a voice it already knows how to use, it'll come to the channel instead of the ground. It'll come here, to me, to the one who's heard it before and cut it off once. It wants the old debt paid more than it wants your babies. And I understood what he was telling me. He was telling me he could call it, that he could offer it the one thing it wanted most, which was the man who'd escaped it 61 years ago. And that if he did, it would pull in toward him, toward the lodge, toward the channel, and off the low ground for as long as that took. And the road at the bottom of the clearing might, for a few minutes, be just a road again. And here is the second unbearable thing, the one I came to tell you, the one the whole story is really about. I didn't argue with him. A better man argues. A better man says, "No, Pop. We all go together, or nobody goes. We don't trade you for a window. You're 86, and you're the reason any of us still came. And I won't buy my children's lives with your death." That's what a good man says. But Pop had already seen me, days before on the porch, when he offered me the chance to take my boys and go. And I wouldn't, because I was too busy being useful to be good. He'd said, "That's the trouble with it. It's always the good ones who wait." And now, at the end, with 9 of us left and my sons 2 of the 9, I was done waiting. And I found out what I actually was when the waiting was over. And what I was a man who would let his grandfather feed himself to the fog so that his children could reach a truck. I didn't say yes. I want that understood. It's a thin thing, but it's all I have. I never said the word yes. I just didn't say no. I stood there and let an old man decide to die for me. And my silence was yes, and Pop knew it. And he put his hand on my face the way he had when I was a boy, and he said, "Go the second it pulls toward the lodge. Don't stop for me. Don't answer anything. Get in the truck and drive, and don't roll the window down for any voice, mine included. If you hear me on that road, it isn't me anymore. Do you understand? If you hear me, it's already got me, and it's using me to stop you." And I said I understood. And I did, and that's the horror of it. I understood perfectly, and I let him do it anyway. He connected the cord. I didn't watch how. I was gathering my boys and the 7 others and getting them to the back door. But I heard the radio come on. A dead marine radio with a cut cord, 60 years silent, 300 miles from any sea, came on with a crackle of static that filled the whole lodge. And then out of it came a voice. And Pop's face when he heard it is the thing I'll die remembering. Because it wasn't fear. It was recognition. It was the face of a man hearing something he'd loved and run from for 61 years. and he said, so quietly, "There you are." And I don't know to this day whose voice came out of that radio for him. Whether it was someone from the ship, someone he'd lost, someone he'd wanted. But it was the thing he'd have walked into the water for. It had been saving that voice for him the whole time. And he sat down in the chair by the shelf and picked up the coiled mic, and he keyed it, the way he must have keyed it 10,000 times as a young man on the water. And he started to answer it, and the fog out every window began to move. All of it, the whole white wall pulling in off the bottom of the clearing and coming up toward the lodge, toward the channel, toward the voice that had finally answered after 61 years. And the bottom of the clearing, where my truck sat, went clear. We ran. 9 of us went down the wet grass in the gray light, and the fog was behind us now, drawn up to the lodge, coming for Pop. And the truck sat there ordinary at the bottom with the keys in it, just like my father's stolen voice had promised. And I threw children into the bed and the cab. I don't know how we all fit. We fit. And I got behind the wheel, and I turned the key. And it started. My good, reliable truck. And I put it in gear, and I drove down that gravel road with the trailer still hitched because there was no time to unhitch it, dragging the whole weight of the reunion behind me, the coolers and the tables and the generator. And I did not look back at the lodge, and I did not stop, and I drove. And on the road, at the second cattle guard, where the bars come back, Pop's voice came out of nowhere. Not from a radio. There was no radio in the truck. Out of the fog that lined the road, my grandfather's voice, warm and easy and unhurt, calling to me to stop, saying, "Slow down, son. You left the trailer brake off. You'll lose it on the grade. Stop and let me check it." Which was a real thing, a true mechanical thing. Exactly the kind of practical problem the man with the trailer would stop for, the thing it knew I could not resist, because being useful was the whole shape of me. And it had learned that. It had learned me through Pop. And it used my grandfather's voice to tell me a true thing about my own trailer, to make me stop the truck on that road. And I almost did. My foot came off the gas. 8 children and adults in the truck, and my foot came off the gas, because my dead grandfather was giving me correct advice about the trailer brake. And Sam, my 6-year-old, in the seat beside me, put his hand on my arm and said, "Daddy, that's the not nice somebody. Don't." A 6-year-old. The one who'd heard it first, days before any of us, the one I hadn't listened to. He knew its voice by then, better than I did. And I put my foot back down, and I drove through the second cattle guard. And the bars came up on my phone, and I did not stop. And behind me, my grandfather's voice called me useless, called me a coward, called me by every soft name I had. And I drove out of the fog into ordinary morning with my 2 sons and 6 others. And I've never gone back, and there is nothing to go back to. 10 of us didn't come out. The report, when there was a report, the sheriff and the searchers, and eventually the people who write the official version, said there'd been an incident at a remote family gathering. A number of persons missing and presumed lost in difficult terrain and heavy fog. An exposure event, a tragedy. And they searched the valley for weeks and found the lodge and the barred doors and Marie's laundry still in its basket. And no bodies. None, not one. 10 people and not one body. And the report couldn't hold that, so it said the terrain, the creek, the fog, the difficulty of the search. And everyone signed it because the alternative was a thing no report can say. And I signed my part of it too, the family statement. And I did not write down the voices or the rope with the edge or the radio that came on with a cut cord, because who would I be if I did? And because some part of me is still, God help me, being useful, Still managing, still making it a thing that reasonable people can file and move on from. That's the whole of it, or the whole of it that words can carry. I survived. My boys survived, and they're all right mostly. Sam startles at the fog on cold mornings, and I don't correct him. I did not lose my life, and I did not lose my mind. And I know that from the outside this looks like the good ending. The man got his children out, and I let people believe that. The way I let Dale believe it was 19. The way I let the report believe it was the terrain. But I know what I am now, which is the thing Pop saw on the porch on the 4th day. I'm not the man who ran too soon out of fear. I'm not even the coward Pop's stolen voice called me on the road. I'm worse and more ordinary than either. I'm the man who is too busy being useful to be good, who wouldn't take his own children and run when an old man begged him to, who then, when the useful thing finally ran out, stood in silence and let that same old man walk into the fog to buy back the minutes I'd wasted, and who drove away dragging the reunion's coolers and folding tables behind him on a trailer he never even stopped to unhitch. The hitch was the only reason the family ever needed me. I got the truck out. I did the one thing the man with the trailer is for. And I did it over the sound of my grandfather answering a voice he'd run from for 61 years. A debt he paid so I wouldn't have to. And the terrible arithmetic of it is that it worked. We're alive because it worked. And there is no version of alive that feels like anything but the trailer still hitched behind me, still dragging everywhere I go, full of everything we brought up the mountain and everyone we didn't bring back down.